Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay. Welcome to a new tutorial. So this tutorial actually isn't quite new. So this is a lesson that I put together a couple of months ago, but privately put it out to everyone in my inner circle. Now, just recently I put out a new lightning tutorial, which is quite different, but I've had a lot of people requesting the original as well. So I thought this would be fun to publicly put this out for everyone to have access to as well. So make sure to check my original lightning tutorial that I put out just a couple of days ago. And in addition, I thought this would be a fun follow-up. So this lesson isn't going to be for everyone, but it will be for those of you who are interested in getting more into lightning and just want some additional information. So some of this stuff I'm already covering, so I will be repeating myself in this lesson, but I thought this would be fun to release in addition. So this is actually two lessons combined into one. So it's a bit lengthy because this was actually two lessons that I've now put into one video. So hopefully that makes sense, and I thought that this would be fun just to put out there for you and everyone who is interested in learning lots more about lightning. Now, oddly, this isn't the last lesson I'm going to put out on this topic. There's a couple more I'm going to do that are much more specific. One's going to be with crowd simulations and lightning and having the lightning affect the crowds. So that's another one that's coming up, and then there's one more that will be focused on having lightning shifting across surfaces. So there's a couple in here. I wanted to go all out on this topic. So hopefully you find this valuable and get a lot from it. I just thought it'd be fun to put this out. So that being said, make sure to subscribe to my channel because I'm putting out new lessons every Monday and Thursday moving forward. So this is a chance for you to not miss out on any of the upcoming tutorials, as well as other lessons and videos and other good stuff. And feel free to leave a comment. Let me know if you want to see more on this topic. Even a simple yes in the comments is more than welcome. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy. So what we're going to be doing here is, as I mentioned in the video leading up to this, I'm going to put together a lesson that's going to be explaining how to do lightning, electricity, that sort of thing. And one of the other things I mentioned was that this is more of a systematic overview. In other words, what we're doing is we're going to go through the process and understand how to do it. Obviously, being spare at the moment, I can't go out and shoot live action aerial footage of Wakanda and go and track the cameras and have match moved creatures running around doing all those bits and pieces, as that will take many weeks to put together. But I want to point that out because as we go through this, I'm going to show you some stuff that you literally could go work at ILM or WETA and use this process on a feature film to get results, get shots finaled. But from experience, because I've been doing tutorials now for, wow, 22 years since my first tutorial. I've been doing this quite a long time. And because of that, I know that there is always going to be one or two people who are not looking at the big picture. I've literally shown shots where it was from a movie, but because I didn't have like a piece of footage in there, or the model wasn't high res enough, there's always going to be one or two people who are like, this isn't professional enough, or whatever. So those are the people who are not looking at the big picture, and I just want to point that out. Not to convince anyone, but more because I'm hoping one or two of those people are going to be like, oh yeah, crap, I do that, you know, because I want you to realize, like, everything that we're doing in the Thanos training, this is applicable to that, okay? You literally could use Thanos and have lightning going around or whatever, but this is going to be fun. This is where we're just going to focus on the technique, because that's what's important. So initially, I'm going to do this in two phases, because I had already been working on this, because I wanted to do this for a long time, and I hadn't ever done any lightning or anything in the sense that as a procedural system. Usually the way that we would do it, like in every movie, is you would create splines with noise, and you would animate them moving around and set up like a rig to do it, but it would literally be splines, and then you would run that through a plugin in 2D, and it would generate all the sub forks and things like that. Even with like plugins and things like that, is always just really rudimentary. And I thought this would be kind of cool. Maybe I could create something that, you know, in this example is a cylinder just moving around, but whatever comes close to the surface, having forks of lightning shooting out from the ground. But as that bit moves around, it stops firing out lightning to it. But then this guy starts hitting here. So we're creating this kind of distance field. Now, what I'd like to do is kind of set this as a two-step lesson. So we're going to do this, and then from there I'll apply it a little bit differently, where let's say we had a bunch of, an army of creatures, and we had a hammer or something fly through, how we could apply that too, where as the hammer moves through, it's going to detect who it's close to and kind of shock them, have electricity move around them. So that will be kind of an extra step, and it just means that we're learning different ways to apply the same effect. And this way, if you want to have like a hover ship or something, I think like the Matrix 2 or 3 has some cool examples where the ship's going to come close to the ground. You have like little lightning bolts, everywhere. And but we're learning to apply it in a few different ways. So initially, load up your scene, and we just have this groovy cylinder moving along. And this to me was just more a test that I wanted to do on my end, because I was curious the other night, whether or not you could even do it. And so what we'll do, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but make sure that we got this sort of setup. So I'm going to create a TyFlow node. Open TyFlow. We don't really need the layer stuff here, so I'm just going to move that so we just got a little bit more room to play around with. Okay, now, what do we do first? Let's do this. Let's initially set up. So we got two objects here. We actually have a flat plane, which is like a collision object. Okay, this guy here. So we could hide that if we want. And then we have this object here. And by the way, whether you're using TyFlow or Thinking Particles, Houdini, whatever you want to use, the process is exactly the same in anything. So drives me nuts. I'm just going to talk for a second, but like I've been doing these daily live streams throughout all of this training, and I'll do a live stream on. I'm doing one today actually, which is going to be about working in the US and how to get a work visa, like a work permit to work internationally. And I guarantee I'm gonna load up a live stream about how to acquire, like how to deal with immigration, how to acquire a work permit to work in another country. I'll start getting hit with questions about what's better, Max or Houdini. Completely irrelevant stuff. And the thing is, at the end of the day, learn these concepts, they apply to everything. It doesn't matter what software package you're using. So just keep in mind that all the things I'm teaching you have legs. You could apply it in anything. So we're going to distribute a few points on the ground, and that's going to be what we'll use to detect, what's coming close to it. Okay. So in other words, let's create a birth, and I want to keep this lesson pretty short too. I want to keep it on point and just kind of like give as much value in the fastest amount of time possible. So for now, let's start out just by putting down 50 points. Okay, so go to position object, pick the ground. I went through this kind of quick, but I'm just emitting all currently at 0, 50 points, and positioning it on the ground object. Later on, we'll be changing a lot of this, but I just want that in the beginning. And I'm just going to move this TyFlow node so it's not annoying me. Okay, so we got that. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to set up a new event, and let's just add a display operator, I guess, and that way we can see at least it's going to change color. So let's just make this bright green. Now, what I want to do is I'll do a surface test, and the surface test is going to allow me to reference this cylinder, our thorax. I'm not going to say the axis name, I can never say it correctly, and we'll link this up. So currently it's not doing anything. You see it's not changing color, but we can set some parameters here to help it trigger. So in other words, we have a distance test. It says if less than 10. And I know just because I've done it already, like if we put 65 is a pretty big radius. If I were to create a sphere and type in 65, that's how we measure it. So that is the range from this object, and so that's what's being activated right now, okay? So 65 is that radius, and just by doing that, it might be hard to see, but these are now activating. We can see that these particles are now moving to a new event based on this thing coming in. So this is how we can say, you know, this object, wherever it goes, to have these particles be aware that it's coming through and for it to have lightning attracted to it. So the next step is that once we've done that, what do we do next? Well, let's spawn some particles. So I always call this like a trigger, or a trigger box, because what this will do is this one event here, in fact we could rename it to trigger box, is going to cause lots of different stuff to happen. So initially we're going to have it spawn some stuff, and the particles being spawned, we can have them go into a new event, and those are going to be attracted to it. So what we'll do now is I just want to set up the system where these are now activating. They're aware that it's near it, and what we'll do is we need it to be aware of the actual surface. Okay, so we're aware, like it activates them, but it doesn't know that the object's there yet. So what I want to do next is let's put in a find target and link these up. Okay, so find target allows it to target an object. Okay, so in other words, if I pick and choose the cylinder, we can see particles are now chasing after it. And if they get to it, they'll land on it, they'll stick to it. But they never do because it's not moving fast enough. So, like I said, we're not trying to create like a swarm, because you could use this to create bees, and I have for many feature films, or nanomites, or whatever you want. We're not going to do that though. We're going to instead make this instantly snap to the surface, because we want this to be like a zap, an actual lightning zap. So rather than the find target controlled by velocity, we click here, we change it to time. It allows it to be activated in a certain time period. So now, it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to make this red, just so it's a little bit easier to see. But these particles are actually attaching to the surface. Okay? So as this moves through, these particles are locking and attaching to that surface as it moves through. So it's cool, but we want to go beyond that. So with the find target, there's a few things I want to change. Mainly, I want it to be instant. So test true if less than 0. We'll set the distance for testing true to 2, let's say. And we don't need to really test true. It's mainly the distance down here that we want to change. So we can set this to 10. We can say the control time to 3. So these are really what we need to change. Come to think, like, these aren't really going to affect anything. But this here is the lowest it can go is 1, which means it takes 1 frame to activate and instantly attach. But I'm setting it to 3, which means it takes an extra 2 frames. So you see, instead of just appearing on there, it's actually flying towards it. And that just means we can get more animated kind of swaying arcs when you picture lightning happening. Okay, so what else? Let's set the ease in to 50. So what happens is, as these particles get closer, you see it's more when they get closer they start to slow down. So in other words, it zaps over and then kind of settles or gets a feel for the surface. It'll become more obvious as we go along, but setting that up to a higher value means it'll fly in and start to slow down as it gets closer. But that's it. Like, beyond that, oops, sorry. What do I do? Keep it on. It defaults to closest. Keep it on that. I meant to change this to. It doesn't really matter, actually. I think hybrid should be fine. But we do want to set this to normals, and that way we can set spread to 1. But just saying that it's a normals means it's going to be attracted to the actual surface normal, and I think that's better than anything, and just means it's aligned with it. All right, so we haven't really done much yet. All we have is a cylinder. It's flying through. As it comes close, it activates these little particles, And all they do is it moves to a new event, the trigger box, which right now just creates an extra particle which is attached to it. But what happens if we could use the red particles as a way to say, fire lightning at me to the green particles? And it's exactly what we're going to do now. So one last step I'm going to do a spawn. And this spawn, I'll put below the find target. And let's just set another event. Let's make this a slow, like a drag. We'll set the 30 and link this to the spawn. So now it's going to generate more particles. They're not doing anything, but what if we said travel by distance? And now we got particles that shoot out like that. Wherever it goes, it's detecting them, and it's creating these particle trails. Now, we don't need to do a distance like this. And again, like, keep in mind, everything I just showed you, again, this is why I gave that little pep talk at the beginning, because I want you to look beyond, you know, we have a cylinder and a flat plane on the ground. Think about, like, okay, we just went through find target. Hey, wouldn't that be a cool flocking system for bees, for birds, for whatever you wanted to do? If they're attached to a surface, wouldn't that be ants? Wouldn't it be spiders, scarab beetles from the mummy? All of these things that I've just showed little, like, you know, tweaks to what we're doing, you can apply all this to get so many different effects. And here we are creating something that literally is firing out these things, which could be lasers, they could be anything. It's drawing these trails. These are all things that, if you're paying attention, I'm showcasing things that you could go off and do your own version of that would become its own effect. So with the spawn, I don't want it to spawn this really defined amount of particles. I just want it to have some. So let's set the step size to 5, and that way there's less. Now, one thing I'm going to do really quick, I think I already did it, and I didn't mention it, so go back to your tie flow. This is really important. Go down here, change your time step to 8 or 16. In other words, it's going to sample it a little bit more. This is important. So that way it's sampling 16 times per frame. It's going to get really accurate about what it's doing. Okay, so we have that. We have the distance set to 5. That's cool. What now? Well, there's a few things we can do. One is, I'm going to put in a resample. And what resample does, drag that in here, resample will actually read the positions between these and it'll allow us to fill it in. Okay, so in other words, I could set this to be a lot lower, I could set the count to be higher, and what's going to happen is it actually uses this to draw particles in between. And this can be really cool because you could have like a 3 or 4 points and it'll fill in the trajectory, the path in between them. So whoops, oh man, I just deleted it by accident because I had them both selected. So resample, what do I have, like 1. Let's put the count to like 15. Okay, let's go crazy. And by doing that, it's creating a lot. I might lower it for now. Let's just go a little bit lower and we can work our way up later. So for now, we'll set it to 1. So the next thing that I want to do though is let's add in a spline path. So I'm going to do spline paths. Spline path will generate a spline based on what the particles are doing. So this can be really, really interesting. Now, out of the options, this is what's even more interesting. Siblings, what's that? Well, each time we had our initial particles on the ground, they got activated based on distance from the cylinder. They go in this trigger box, which we're going to do lots of cool stuff with. But all it did is just create a particle. But see this line, technically you could think of this as a relationship. Here is the grandchildren, here are the children, here's the parents, this is the granddad, okay? Like this is the sibling, the hierarchy. So technically it's parents rather than siblings, but same thing. So siblings means it's going to remember the relationship. So in other words, if we go back to spawn, there's actually a lot of really cool options in here. So one is remember parent, parent-child info. So in other words, it remembers where it came from. Okay. you remember who your daddy is? Well, this is it. So here we have a particle on the ground. The green particles spawn red particles that appear up here, but they remember who they were born from. So all of this is important because now we're going to use the spline paths. This will allow us to create this relationship between all the stuff. So keep it on siblings, click create, and that's going to generate this tie splines node. And this tie splines node actually is generating splines where the particles are. So as this moves through, we can see it's generating particles, but it's also generating a spline. So already, again, this is stuff that you could use for rope, for so many different things. And this is where it's going to start to get interesting. So I'm going to start adding some delete nodes because I don't want these to live as, like, how long does lightning live for? Faster than the speed of lightning or whatever the thing is. So lightning is fast. So I'm going to go to event age. I'm going to set this guy to delete after 3 frames. So now, hopefully you can start to see like where we're headed with this. We got some stuff going on. So I'm going to get this delete, copy it, paste in here. 3 frames sounds cool to me. And from there, I think that actually works pretty well. So just by doing, these little bits, we now have something a little bit more interesting happening. And we probably don't need to turn these displays on anymore. We can just look at the splines, but already we now have this cylinder coming in, and based on its distance, is detecting and firing in, and that ease in is, all of these things is in the find target. So the find target, here is controlling all of that. Now, I don't care about the curves, but what if we start adding turbulence? What if we start doing a lot of really cool stuff? So part of this is that I'm going to add a force operator in here. I'll keep it below the resample. Put the slow above. Again, it's just when it's something that lives for 3 frames, I feel like every frame counts. It's better to have it all sampling correct. So with this, with the force, so far most of the effects that we've done have been more kind of like cigarette smoke, very detailed. I'm going to create a turbulence setting here that's a lot more wavy. So in other words, I'm going to set the strength to 3, so it's very turbulent. We can already see that it's happening. However, and this is why I wanted to do this last, because now we can visualize what's actually going on. Rather than saying the turbulence to 2, where it's high frequency, it repeats the pattern. If you're picturing a sine wave, the sine wave is repeating very quickly. Frequency, lowering this value, so like 0.05, it's going to repeat less times. But the scale is the other thing we need to do. So we need to do this is 0.08. Now we're getting these wavy lines. So we're creating these bigger arcs by bringing this down as a bigger arc. Bringing the frequency down means it doesn't repeat as much. We can change this to turb, and we can adjust the iterations, and that will give it more detail. But right now, this already is starting to give us some lightning effects. Okay? And the cool thing is it's all based on distance. So whatever you want to have as it comes close, and again, like I could create like a doorway, and anything that goes through the doorway gets electrocuted. We could do whatever we want because we set up a very simple system, which is detecting everything up here, and then it's literally firing out a particle into the ground, and then saying generate a new particle that's attached to the cylinder. So that way it knows where to fire to, and then this is creating the gap. Okay, this is creating everything else. So already we got something pretty cool. Now with the turbulence, let's go and add a second one. Let's go and maybe make this one not as turbulent, but we could give it a higher frequency. We could maybe give it more iterations. And this is just going to make it more noisy. Okay, so this is a secondary one that makes it more noisy. And already we got something pretty neat. Now on top of this, I could copy this setup and we could do something pretty cool with it. So what I think is I'm just going to copy and we'll paste it. And that way, as it finds the target, it's still going to maneuver a little bit. It's very subtle, but this way it's moving around it a little bit more. It's not so perfect, because I don't want this to be like lasers. I want it to still have a life of its own. But already we got something pretty neat. So this allows us to have an object flying through, and it's creating those lasers as it comes through. Now, from here, the world's our oyster. We can do a lot. So part of this is, if we wanted to go back to birth, we could set this to like 1,000, and it's going to get crazy. But again, you know, total control here. Just for fun, for one moment. Let's set up a cylinder. And again, I'm just going off script, showing this off really quick, but the whole point is that I can set this to 500, something crazy like that. I'll kill the caps. And just for fun, all I'm doing is I'm changing it to the cylinder. So, what's going to happen? Well, everywhere this thing goes, it's going to get electrocuted. Obviously, if we were to get this now, go back in the cylinder, and set this to like 75, it's going to be even thinner. Might need to refresh the object. Just clicking anything I think is going to refresh it. But now it's everywhere. So I mean, this is my whole point. Like, you could do anything with this. So here's the next thing, and we can turn that cylinder off. Though, you know, that's fun and everything, but what if we, you know, right now, if we look at this, it creates them once and then they die, and then it creates new ones and they die. What if we wanted to constantly be zapping it everywhere? So that again is really easy. Like, all we need to do is we say, you know, 100 frames. So let's emit this for 100 frames, and then we just set up a constant birth rate of 5 or whatever we want it to be. And I'll get this delete operator, throw it in there, and we set that to 5 as well. So now there's, you know, forget all the spawning and everything else for a second. I think, like, I just turned this off, but the splines sometimes still kind of have cached in memory if you turn them off. But if you look here, now we have these dancing things. So I'm going to change the display to large dots. You can see that we now have these particles dancing around, but that just means that the positions are randomly changing this entire time. So the advantage of that, I'm going to turn display off, is that we now have these forks constantly being generated everywhere it goes. So hopefully already you're seeing the potential here. Like, you could use this for everything. So already we now have a lightning system that's detecting when anything comes near it, and we could do it with everything else. We could animate a sphere, you know, dipping down the ground, and every time it comes close, it does that. And we could do it with so much stuff. So hopefully already this is like, all right, cool. Like, I get it. This makes sense. It's really cool. But let's make it a bit more interesting, because like having the lines on the ground is awesome. But what if we created some extra electricity that's just around the contact points? Okay, so that's why we have this trigger box. I'm going to delete that other one, because this is triggering spawn lightning bolts, whatever. And so we could have another one now that is just spawning, you know, the contact points. So in other words, I could have, let's say, a spawn here, copy, paste. There we go. Paste. Put this above. All right, so this is going to link into here, and this guy here is going to, we could do a few other things with it. One thing I might do is, what if we just had a little bit of like a ripple on the ground, so it kind of fired out, you know, some extra electricity on the ground. All I would do in this situation is do a speed, link it up. We obviously don't want these to last too long, so I'm going to copy and paste that in there. So this one, all I would do is I would give it a speed, and that way it's like, you know, randomly going to fire out particles. I want to do it based on particle Z. And we can set the divergence to be like 90. And you don't really see much right now, but what if we fired out more particles? So we set this instead to be like per second. So now it's just constantly emitting these particles. So if that were the case, we could set up the same thing. We could, you know, do splines, turbulence, copy, paste. Now, it's kind of hard to see, but we have these splines generating on the ground everywhere it goes. The only problem with that is the fact that they, you know, it's just one. It's kind of like a worm or something on the ground. So we can go back, add spawn, and, you know, I've communicated the core principle. Now all I'm doing is I'm elaborating on that. Okay, so as long as you've caught the core principle here, we're building on that now. So with the spawn, all I want to do is I'm going to spawn, let's say, I don't know, 3 particles, something like that. And we could randomize that a little bit as well. So now there's going to be multiple particles shooting out. Okay, let's really enhance the speed a little bit. That way, let's say I put the spawn actually in here. I put the speed below that. And let's give this a bigger magnitude. Now we got like crazy particles shooting out everywhere. Okay, so obviously we'll tone it back, but now you can see that just from that one thing, it's creating additional stuff. So one thing is, instead of lasting for 3 frames, let's just set this to 1 frame. That way it's not very long. It's just going to be sporadically shooting electricity out around the areas that are contact points. Finally, I want to do one last thing. So we're kind of building up a bit of a complicated system. I'm going to have a spawn, and I'll put that below all the other stuff. I might get our turbulence and actually move that in here. And this will all make sense in a second, but I'm just going to do what we've already done before. I'm going to do a spawn. I'm going to do it based on travel distance. And so this one, we'll make it pretty refined. So, sorry, 0.5. And let's see what we got so far. So we got particles shooting out everywhere. So part of that could be that I'm just going to copy a delete operator from down here. We're just layering up the same stuff. We're just, you know, having fun at this point. But with this turbulence, this would be a chance for us to build something a bit more interesting. So again, I'm just going to borrow things wherever I can. I'm just going to throw the resample in, because that way we can refine this a little bit more. I'm going to set the distance threshold and then the count to 10. So now we're getting lots of particles. They're quite fine, and obviously shooting out too far. So finally, all I want to do here is I'm going to go back in and change the velocity inheritance here. I'm going to set it to 5, and that way it's not shooting out very far at all. But it has a lot of turbulence. I'm going to randomize that a little bit, give it some divergence as well, and the divergence will make it spread, so we'll add that in. Okay, and suddenly now we just have crazy particles shooting out everywhere, but they're only lasting a couple of frames, but it's giving that craziness that we want. Now, we could probably optimize this a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit too nuts. Try spawn distance. If I lower that down, the thing is I want some because I want it to arc. I need it to have a lot of detail. So I'm going to try 1. Resample. And we'll keep it at 0.25. I'm going to turn display off on these guys, but I will copy the spline path in here as well. Alright, so already now we have like the lightning bolt shooting out, but it also created the, wherever it goes, it's creating this kind of crazy additional electricity. Now, we don't want that to live forever, so what do? It's all being spawned from this guy. So if we were to go back in, we just need to tell this to only last for like 1 frame. And that way, it's just generating these crazy particles for 1 frame at a time. This is where, just for a second, don't worry about mimicking what I'm doing, I just want to see whether I can get that to be a little bit finer. Yeah, so keeping it 0.25 now, it makes more sense, because now that we want to get that detail, this actually makes a lot of sense to have. So my resample value is 0.25 and 10. We didn't change it, but the spawn, I did point the distance to 0.25, and that means it's going to be a little bit more detailed to play with. That'd be the main thing. There's not really much else that we're doing to it, but I think it's just important to have that set up. And now what's happening is, as this moves through, it's creating this electricity on the ground. It's creating a relationship with the ground as well. Now with the speed, we could definitely play with this if we wanted to. If we didn't want it to go up in the air as much, we just lower it to the ground more. You've got a lot of options there. But having that contact point, like having something, is, I think, important just to make it feel like it's not just firing out little splines, but it's actually creating that relationship. Okay? So I'm going to set that, I don't know, 12, whatever, just something. But we can build on this more. Okay, so I won't spend forever on this, but I think that it is worthwhile just kind of building out something that's kind of cool. So part of that could be that, what if we don't want it to be from that exact point? That exact dot. What we could do instead is we could go in and create a shape. This is where like the ordering is going to become really important. I'm going to turn display on, display as geometry. I'm going to make this a sphere, so we'll change it to 3D, like mid-level sphere. Sorry, sphere. And the size is kind of small. So what we'll do is I'm going to throw in scale. Put the scale underneath. And let's scale this up a little bit. I'll keep it on inherit, but I'll set this to 750. So 750, 750, 10. All we did is we created these pancakes on the ground. And I want to use this to emit from this shape. Rather than the dot, I want to actually use the shape. So we go to spawn, and we can actually say voxel shape. And this is important because what it's going to allow us to do is we could set this to be like something a little bit bigger, because it's actually doing a level set. It's dropping particles inside of it, so it's creating multiple particles now. So bringing it up is lowering the detail a little bit. But it means that now these arcs are coming out around this kind of pancake area, rather than it being just that one thing. The only problem with that is that now the actual lightning bolts are going to be randomly offset because they're emitting from the surface. And it's getting a little bit slow, so I think we could probably optimize this a little bit more. But before I do any of that, let's do 2 things. I'm going to drop another scale, because I need to reset this before it goes into the next thing. So let's go to scale, just because otherwise, now that we've assigned a shape, like first of all, let's deal with the scale. So the scale, I'm going to simply just override it. So we'll set it to absolute, and we're good to go. It's back to how it was. But the other thing is that we assigned a shape, so technically every single event is spawning spheres. We just can't see them because we're displaying dots. So let's do a shape remove. And shape remove is going to kill the shape, and we're going to put it here. So this is pretty cool. We because the ordering of your event is so important, we assign a shape, we scale the shape, we then use that shape to spawn particles around the shape, and then we reset the scale, we delete the shape, and then it starts spawning business as usual. So everything here has no shape, but this stuff here does. So again, part of that would be to copy and paste the shape remove, put it at the top, and that way it needs to be at the top. It's going to kill the shape, and then it's going to go about doing what it does. And now it already feels faster because it's not creating all this excess geometry. Does that make sense? Okay. So now it's respecting the shape. It's emitting from that shape, and then it goes about what it's doing. And so we just get a little bit more randomness. So this is the main core lesson. This is what I wanted to get across, is that we've built something that is effectively generating electricity that's attached or attracted to. I'm just going to turn that display off. And any other ones. Yeah, as the object comes through, it's attracted to it and it's generating all this stuff. Let's see if I can turn off the icon. Okay, it doesn't look like there's an option for that. That's fine. Or is there? Show icon. There we go. Off. Okay, so there we go. And as I said, all of this is emitting from this object in the center. This is just for display, but we could use it for a collision object if we wanted. Whatever we want to do. Now I can up the amount, and it's just going to be generating more of this. And here we have it. So this is really cool because, again, just like I put that cylinder in, we could have it literally firing out everywhere, doing all this, creating all these sub-forks based on that. And I leave it to you as a challenge, like if you wanted to, where the forks hit, that could be generating more electricity. And that could be moving over the shape of it. We can do all this stuff because it's all respecting the hierarchy. Okay, so this is part one of the lesson. I'm actually going to split this into two. I'm going to be completely honest. It's because I have so much stuff to record, I'm going to have to prioritize. My original intent with this lesson was pretty much to just do this and then cover a little bit about shaders, and that was it. But I want to go more in depth. I want to give you more value. So I'm going to create a second lesson, and we're going to continue building on this, and that will probably be out tomorrow. I'll try and put together a second lesson. So continuing on from here, I'm going to change it up. The next step would be, for fun, I want to have this be a hammer moving through, let's say, a bunch of placeholders, which would be, creatures or whatever, and have it instead zap out at them. And when it zaps them, have electricity kind of moving over the body. I think something like that would be really fun. So that would be the next step that I want to do. And then also the lighting and shading. Just because, again, like lightning is a light source, and it's not very difficult to set up where we could get some really cool effects. So I think this will be really fun. I'm just going to go a little bit further with it in a second lesson. And I want you to use these concepts, but obviously, rather than using a cylinder, go and add a hammer, or whatever you want. But just keep in mind, like, this is something that frustrates me, is just because I'm using a cylinder, there is that one or two people out there who's just like, this sucks because I'm using a cylinder, right? Like, we're learning effects. Like, how does that affect anything? But I say that more because I want you to look beyond what you're seeing and think like, hey, technically Allan just showed me how to do crowds, how to do hair, how to do rope, how to do all of these different things. That, let me go and rewind and like look into that fine target thing. Let me go and rewind and look in that other thing and see what else I can create with all of these different things. The tie spline, all the different bits and pieces. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, but I'm hoping it kind of gives you some cool ideas. Okay, I want to thank you for your patience while I got this training together for you. Obviously, putting together all the videos I have, it's been a long journey, and I'm finally getting a chance, having not slept yet, to loop back and get you the second video, which I wanted to just add in as an added bonus. So, as we created this like a week ago now, it was a lot of fun, just because initially when I created this, it was just more as a concept. I wanted to just kind of see, like, even if you could do it with Typhlo. And, I think there's so many possibilities with this. So this was really exciting to do. And the Thanos training has been pretty intense. I think it clocked in like 15 hours or something, which when it's 15 hours, it's really double that in days. So it's really been about 45 to 50 days to put this all together. It's been a lot of work. So again, thank you for your patience with this. So I'm just going to do this on the fly, and I think part of this is actually going to be seeing my thinking process, because I haven't done this before, and I'm literally just going to make it up as I go. But I think the advantage of that is that we're actually going to get to see how I go through it, and I'm obviously going to make a couple of mistakes as we go, but I kind of want to do that because I think that it'll just be cool to see a bit of like how I work rather than just kind of giving a step-by-step approach. So right now, this is our current setup. I'm going to just bring up Typhlo. And so we've got this set up. This was obviously the forks and the spawning and everything. If we turn that off, then we just got the original bolts that are happening. Okay. And what I want to do is, right now they're actually scattered, just to recap, they're scattered on the ground. And I just love the idea of just kind of having something like that happen like that. But what we can do now is we could actually take the same concept but apply it to this object instead. And part of that would be to then make it detect certain objects and kind of zap out at them. And then what I'd like to do is have electricity kind of run over the thing. So the way that we'll do this is we'll turn off all this stuff. Let's just start with the actual cylinder. So usually, not usually, all the time, whenever I'm working on a shot or if I'm giving other people shots, I'll break down like what I want step by step. And that way this whole thing becomes very easy. So for us, just turning the delete operator off as well, I don't want it to emit the whole time. I'd rather it emit, maybe I do. In fact, let's just keep it the same. I think that what we have actually works. But rather than doing the surface test, let's lock it to the shape. So we go like object bind. It's funny, you don't do something for a day and you kind of completely forget how it works. So object bind and position object. I'm going to remove the plane. I'm going to choose this instead. So now what's happening is we have the actual object with the particles attached. And it's kind of similar effect, but it's reversed now. It's actually the object doing it. And so what we can do next is we could go to the find target. And again, I'm just making this up as I go, so I might need to do some fiddling, but I'm just adding in this object. And I think these splines are not drawing, like they're not calculating, it's just doing it, so we'll see. But in fact they are, because none of this is actually feeding down into it anymore. So that's the one thing I've found deceiving about the splines, is when they're not getting information. See, I just turned it off. When they're not getting information, they instead just repeat what they were doing, which makes sense. It's cached in the memory, but it's also deceiving because it's giving you false information. So right now it's not doing anything, but then we can say surface distance test, and right now it's on itself, but we'll change that to the cylinder. So now as this comes along, I might move the cylinder closer just so we don't have to wait as longer, but now what's going to happen is as it gets closer, it's going to test true, and it is testing true, we're just not seeing anything. I'm curious if I, turn on the splines back on down here, we're already getting something that's working. This may be a 2-minute tutorial, so just kidding. But so now we can see that it's feeding out electricity to this object as it happens. So I'm curious if I duplicate this and make another one maybe here, if we can add that in as well, because I'd love to have 2 objects or more getting zapped procedurally. So now we got 2, and there we go. So already this is now zapping multiple objects as it moves through, which is kind of neat. So finally, I'm going to duplicate one more time, and we'll just add this guy in. Find target, do the same thing. And we probably, oh actually we can kill this, by the way. We just need one flat plane. We don't need any planes at all really, but okay, so now we can see the electricity's firing, and then as it gets closer, it should, there we go, zap that one as well. So that's pretty cool. We've already got this set up where we've got it working, it's zapping anything it comes in contact with. And, you know, if you wanted, like, the whole idea for me was always, I was going to put out 2 tutorials, and, you know, one of these was going to be a Thor's hammer from the shot that we're referencing, and, you know, I thought it'd be cool just throw in some, animate some characters, do all that. You know, and the other one I'll leave as a surprise, but, you know, there's definitely a lot of stuff with electricity I thought it would be fun to do, because I haven't really seen anyone do good procedural electricity so far. I say that as in I haven't really leaned into it enough to kind of see that, but like for me, like Weta did a really great job with the Prestige back in the day, and I thought that was really cool in 2006. But I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of good electricity out there, but usually I've found it's always manually done, and because of that, I've always it's just kind of been one of those things I always wanted to play around with. I'm just going to freeze these just because it's a little bit, in fact, we'll just make it clay. I think it's going to be easier. Alright, so we got that, that's all working. The next challenge though, I mean, we could also turn this on. Yeah, so we try turning that on. I don't really care to do that, but we could see what happens when it does. Yeah, I mean, we can. I kind of don't care. So we can turn off all the shape stuff here, the shape removal, all that stuff. I'm just focusing on the forks, so like, I don't think it's too necessary. We can turn that off. Now, because of that, I'm just thinking, yeah, I mean, in fact, sorry, I'm just thinking, again, thinking out loud. I'm going to get the object bind and paste it down here. And that way, the lightning should continue to link up to this object. Is that correct? Yeah. Oh, and copy the delete operator in as well, because it only should last for a certain amount of time. But this way the electricity continues to kind of chase the object. We might need to play with the sampling if necessary, but you know, in general it works. So the other task that we need to do is just have electricity kind of moving over the objects. So I'm going to turn the spline paths off for a second, just because you know we've got what we need to be able to see that this is testing, and then it turns on for these guys. So let's change the display to dots. We can make these like cyan blue or something. And even with this, you could you'd have it stick to the surface more. Like, there's definitely things you could play around with just to kind of help force it to react a bit quicker. Timing was one of them, distance, things like that, as well as the ease in. So just keep that in mind that you've got some pretty interesting controls with the find target you could take advantage of. Okay, so like I said, the last thing that I wouldn't mind doing is just getting the electricity when it hits something to run electricity all around it. And I think the easiest way to do that is we have these blue particles. We could actually have them spawn some particles that kind of just spread out. So you do spawn, put it down the bottom, and then, so again, like these guys here, we won't delete them, but like they're not part of this anymore, unless you want to bring them back in. Okay, so with this, we're going to spawn, and we'll spawn like 10 particles, something like that, and we'll just have them kind of run over the body. Alright, so I'm going to spawn these, and let's do a delete operator. We'll just make it last for, I don't know, a few frames. So we'll just say continuous, and sorry, I'm saying particle age 10. Link these up, and we'll do on entry, we'll just say like 10 particles, something like that. Alright, and for now, let's throw like a speed on. Again, I'm just making this up as I go, and I'm just going to do a lock bind, an object bind. Wrong software. Alright, so the object bind, we'll set the position, like friction to like 15, something like that. So the whole point is that we go object bind, we can pick all these objects, and I remember the distance test we did were like 65, so we can try something like that. I don't think it's really necessary to put that in there, but the whole point is that now we have these particles coming down here. I'm going to turn off the display on this stuff just for now, so that way we just focus on this one thing, and we can see that we got these particles on here. I'm going to say lock to surface, and then we can also snap to surface, and timing is continuous. Cool. So anyway, whole point is that now we have these particles kind of linked to the objects as they come through, and the final test would be this guy here. If it does that one, then we're in a good place. Yep, cool. And I'm gonna go back to speed, and let's just set this to like 3, something like that. So that way it's gonna come out more. Let's try 6. So the whole point is we just have these particles spreading over everything, and then they die. Now, what do we want to do? Let's copy the spline parts in here, and try putting these down the bottom. I'm going to do a resample, and I'll put that at the top. And the resample is going to be useful just to set distance. It'll just help with connecting all this. You can see we now are generating particles on the mesh. The particles are a bit, boring. I'm going to turn this one off so we can see it on here. So they're a little bit boring right now, but we can get this to be a bit more interesting. I think just if we do like a turbulence on top, so I'm going to throw a force. And with this force, we'll make this really high frequency. So turb, let's start with 0.5 and do something, even the iterations we'll put at 3. So in general, this is looking alright, but like, let's do this. Let's go to, what do I do? Let's go to timing. And let's make this continue to revise, so continuous on the resampling. And set the threshold a little bit higher just to start with. Be careful though, because again, you're compounding the particles in here, but this is going to create that kind of craziness of electricity that we probably want to go for. So right now, it's creating a lot. But if we make the lifespan less, we could say like 3 with a variation of 4. Now the particles aren't going to live as long. So as these come in, it's going to create that craziness that's spreading over everything. And then it begins to die down. And we can continue with this. We could actually have it fire out forks. I mean, we had that before up here, where these ones could then fire out additional forks on everything. So I'm just curious. Again, I'm just screwing around at this point, but I'm going to drag this down here, plug it in here. So this is purely just proof of concept, just to point this out, but like now we have electricity running over the surface, but that's also firing electricity off of the surface too. So you kind of create like a whole system setup from this. So I'm going to turn the spawns off because we're creating a lot of them. Travel distance, I'm going to set this to like 1. Again, I'm just doing this purely as proof of concept. As it comes in, now it's firing electricity off of it as well, which is kind of cool. Okay, so you know, that to me was like pretty much the goal of this. I wanted to keep this fairly short, but already I don't know, I think this is pretty cool. Let's turn spline paths back on, but already we have an object, same one as before. It's firing out that lightning. That lightning's now hitting these guys, and as it does that, it's spreading over it. It's even coming off of it as well. So I guess the last two things that we would do is I'm going to go back to the spawn here, and if we just want to make the bolts a little, you know, more dense, we can just go and add like, you know, more in here, and it's just going to make them just be a bit more defined overall. Besides that, I think overall we're in a pretty good place. It definitely is spawning a lot of these guys, so as it comes through, you know, we could look at either playing with the sampling, you get like 0.5, something like that, or emit less here, so set this to 2. Just something so that way it's not as intense, because it definitely is drawing a lot, and we just upped the amount of bolts being created, so it might be worth like dropping that to 5 or something. So I'm just going to scroll through and just kind of see if we can balance this out, because I know that this is going to get really dense now that we increase this. So I think it's going to be a combination of all of these. Yeah, so alright. What I'm going to do is keep this how we had it, just we're going to emit less. So I'm going to say 1, and the resample, I think that was fine. But I mainly just want to emit less, because what's happening is we're spawning a lot of additional stuff here. So now that we're spawning more, we need to kind of lower this down. So I might even just lower the spawn rate a little bit. So we still want to have like lots of stuff actively happening, just it can get pretty intense pretty quick, so that would just be our way of dumbing that down a little bit. Okay, but overall I think this looks cool. I'm digging what we got. So I'm going to run a preview, and I think that will be it. But I think overall it's kind of neat that we're now have an object that can move through a scene. It'll automatically detect other objects and zap electricity, which kind of runs over it. And again, like, you could do so much more with it. I just want this to be purely a proof of concept. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you got a lot from it. Like I said, this was a bonus thing that I just thought I'd put out for fun, so not for everyone. But if you do want to know more about Lightning or you have questions, feel free to leave a comment below. In addition to that, if you want to see more on this topic or others, feel free to let me know in the comments. Even a simple yes is enough to say, hey Allan, do more of this. So I appreciate you watching. I hope you got a lot from this, and I'll be back in a couple of days with more videos and other good stuff. Thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing.